In history, the biggest skydiving accident was caused by a small mistake. This mistake was made when 18 skydivers had jumped off the plane and there was no way back. After jumping off the plane, all the excitement of the 18 skydivers turned into fear. These were all experienced skydivers, but unfortunately, their years of experience could not be used here. In this accident, 16 skydivers were killed, and the 2 remaining divers who told the story made a ruckus. Welcome to Topot Rove. Viewers, today the world remembers this accident as the Lake Erie Disaster. Lake Erie is the 4th largest lake in the United States, Ohio, and the 11th largest lake in the world. There is a small airfield 13 kilometers south of Lake Erie called Outner Airport. On August 27, 1967, 30 skydivers arrived at this airport because they were offered free flights. The B-25 bomber plane, used in World War II, which was modified by a private company, offered these skydivers free flights. When the skydivers began to sit in the plane one by one, there was less space in the B-25 bomber. The pilot selected only 20 divers at the last moment due to overweight. This selection was done at the experience and skill level of the divers. The remaining 10 divers were saddened by the lack of their selection, but they knew that this decision of the pilot would save their lives. The plan was that the B-25 bomber would take off from Outner Airport and go around 20,000 feet. He would come to this airport and drop 18 divers. After that, he would go further up and jump the last 2 divers at 30,000 feet. All these divers had to land back at Outner Airport with the help of parachutes. Due to the weather, the flight could not take off in the morning, but the B-25 bomber took off at 3 p.m. All the divers in the plane were very excited because they were getting a free flight, and they had the first experience of jumping from a bomber plane. After the takeoff of the B-25, a small Cessna 180 plane took off from the same airport. It had to be at an altitude of 12,000 feet and be captured by the camera by the skydivers. The B-25, which had divers in it, was going up in a spiral. Due to the weather, the pilots of both the planes were connected to the air traffic control tower, which was telling them their location. Finally, an hour later, the B-25 bomber had reached an altitude of 20,000 feet. The pilot radioed the control tower and found out his location. At that time, GPS technology was not available. Therefore, if the weather was bad, the pilots had to take help from the control tower. The control tower told the B-25 pilot that it was 9 kilometers away from Outner Airport. According to this information, the location of the B-25 was something like this on the map. That is, now it was close to the drop zone. Just a minute later, the pilot of the Cessna 180 also contacted the air traffic controller and found out his location according to the B-25. Because of the weather, the pilot of the Cessna 180 could not see the B-25. The air traffic controller told the pilot that it was 9 km away from the B-25. That is, if the location of the B-25 was 9 kilometers away from the Outner Airfield, then the location of the Cessna 180 was also 9 kilometers away from the B-25 and 18 kilometers away from the Outner Airport. After a few minutes, the B-25 pilot again found out his location at an altitude of 20,000 feet, and this time the controller told him that he has now reached the Outner Airport. On this, the pilot indicated to the 18 skydivers the small mistake that was going to kill the skydivers has actually happened, but for now, no one knows. At this altitude, the temperature was minus 30 degrees Celsius. Because of this, all the skydivers had an extra layer of jumpsuits on them. All the skydivers jumped from the B-25 so that they could form their formation during the free fall. At that time, they saw a layer of clouds below them, and they had to deploy their parachutes after crossing the clouds. They all started enjoying their free fall, but when they crossed the thick layer of clouds, their excitement suddenly turned into fear. What they see is not the ground below them, but deep water of Lake Erie. At this time, their height was about 3,000 feet, and everyone immediately deployed their parachutes, in the hope that they could somehow land on the lake's border near the ground. But unfortunately, this could not happen. The place where they landed was at least 10 kilometers away from the ground. They thought that after landing in the water, they would immediately get out of their harness and wait for help. But it did not happen as they thought. Because of the weight of the layers of warm clothes they wore, it was not possible for them to swim on the water. Two of them were divers who had removed their shoes and unnecessary weight before landing. These were the only two divers who could swim in the water for a while and were later rescued. The remaining 16 divers unfortunately could not survive, and no one saw their bodies for the next few days. The last body was recovered after a week. This incident made headlines all over the world, and to find out the real reason for this incident, an investigation team was also appointed. It was to find out where B-25 had dropped them and who was it. The air traffic controller said that the time when B-25 had dropped the divers, they were 10 kilometers from Lake Erie to Otner Airport. They believed that because of the strong winds, the divers drifted to Lake Erie. It was possible that the divers really drifted to Lake Erie, but if we listen to the ATC for a second, it means that the winds had drifted the divers for a total of 20 kilometers. 10 kilometers from Otner Airport to Lake Erie and then 10 kilometers further into Lake Erie. Experts did rough calculations of the wind speed and the height of the diving that day and found out that the divers could only drift for up to 5 kilometers. That means there was something wrong with the ATC statement. This was the claim of the at-sea, but the pilots of B-25 and Cessna planes said that our location was wrong. Finally, the investigation found out that when both pilots asked the ATC for their location, the shift of the controllers had changed, and the location that the other controller told the B-25 was actually Cessna's location. That is, when the pilot of B-25 was told that he was at the Otner Airport, he was actually at Cessna 180 Airport and B-25 was at Lake Erie. In addition, the divers and pilots made a mistake that they went against the aviation laws and jumped without seeing the target. In the memory of the solar pilots, for the next 2 years, other skydivers wore floating equipment and intentionally landed themselves in Lake Erie. In 1972, the court held the Federal Aviation Authority responsible for the death of these 16 divers, and the B-25 pilot's license was suspended forever. In addition, this rule was made for skydivers that they will jump 50 kilometers away from any water. I hope you will also like and share this video of Topotrov. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next great video.